Among the many tasks to be tackled by the incoming Yoon administration are those related to the economy amid the prolonged pandemic and geopolitical risks. For more, I have Professor Song Soo-young from Chungang University. Professor Song, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
I also have Professor Kim Se-wan from Ewha Women's University. It's good to see you again, Professor Kim.
Thank you for having me.
Right, Professor Song, inflation here in the country and elsewhere across the world amid the pandemic has been aggravated by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Having said that, what are your prospects with regard to global inflation?
Yeah, according to the report and data, then the U.S. economy has experienced a very large surge, very rapid surge of the inflation. But most of the sophisticated investors and some experts, academicians, believe that is relatively transitory. Over the coming years, the inflation pressure will be subsided over time, but though moderately. But however, the most uncertainty is derived from the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Actually, those wars are regarded as a civil war among the Russians in Eastern European countries. But the problem is, recently we have seen that the U.S. government has warned against the Chinese government not to help the Russia. So it means that the conflict may be escalated and extended to some kind of new Cold War. If that happens, that is realized, that it would be a most serious threat and obstacle to overcome of the coming years for the Korean economy in the phase of the recovery. And so that is also a very important issue, how to deal with that issue. That is sometimes beyond the control of the Korean government right now. So that is an obstacle, I think.
Hopefully it will not escalate to that point. Professor Kim, meanwhile, as part of efforts to rein in inflation, Korea's central bank became the first major central bank in Asia to hike its benchmark interest rate late last year amid the onset of the pandemic. Do you suppose the incoming Yoon administration will perhaps adopt a similar monetary policy direction?
As of now, the market's expectation is that Bank of Korea would raise the key interest rate 3 times by 0.25% for each until the end of the year. So then the Bank of Korea's key interest rate will be 2% from today's 1.25%. But the economic situation is getting more complicated due to the war in Ukraine, which provides more serious shock to global energy market and global inflation. The domestic inflation exceed 3% level over 5 straight months from last October. And that became one of the strongest inflation pressure in 2 decades. Since the main job of the central bank is a fighter against inflation, the new chairman of Bank of Korea will try to raise the interest rate further to stabilize the inflation. However, if the economic situation, like the employment and economic recovery, gets weaker, there is a possibility that central banks can speed down the interest rate hike schedule.
Right. And Professor Song, a key pledge by President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol during his campaign was comprehensive compensation for small businesses in light of the hardships incurred because of COVID-19 related restrictions. Do tell us a bit more about this presidential pledge.
Yeah, because of the supply disruption and the shortage of the laborers, that has devastating negative impact on some small business people. So always the people with the income level of the lower scale always suffered most from some disruption and some economic recession. So it is necessary to help them to recover and overcome these obstacle ordeals. And because this is a transitory, and as Professor Kim has mentioned, the energy price is soaring, but recently I have seen that the future price of the Western Texas Intermediate and Brent oil has been declined over the few days ago. And so that tells us that because the price surge of the energy price is a kind of price gouging, so which means that they has earned a profit as much as possible while the oil is producing and is demanding. But otherwise, in the future, that is the demand for the oil is necessarily declining over time. So to that regard, we can say that the energy price inflation pressure will be removed in the upcoming years. So, but for the time being, it needs help, those small business people to overcome and this ordeal. That is necessary step for the President-elect Yoon to do for the coming years.
Right. And Professor Kim, President-elect Yoon has spoken against issuing government bonds, claiming that funds to help small businesses can be raised by restructuring this year's budget. How feasible is this claim?
It is said that to implement the new president campaign pledges, it cost about 250 trillion won in next 5 years. To finance these pledges, restructuring current budget is not easy job because every single one in the budget has its name tag, which is related to economic interest to a certain group of people outside. So I think in the end, new president should be selling the bonds to finance his own campaign pledge projects. But there is one way to avoid this increasing debt or selling the bonds. The one possibility is if tax revenues for this year exceed government's regular budget over 608 trillion won, like that of last year's 27 trillion won tax revenue surplus, the new government can avoid issuing the bonds or increasing the government debt.
Right, I see. And Professor Song, before we delve any further, actually, what can you tell us about Korea's fiscal health?
I think that Korea's fiscal debt actually against the GDP level is one of the lowest among the more advanced countries. So we have really larger room for to make use of the fiscal policy rather than some monetary policies such as interest rate hike or other some control or the quantitative easing. But however, recently we have seen that whether the Korean economy the unemployment rate has reached the full employment rate or not, I'm not sure about that. I'm not convinced at all that Korea economy has reached the full employment rate, because once we reach the full employment rate, the wage increase will be directly reflected in the inflation rate. So that is what's happening right now in the U.S. So according to the data, U.S. has experienced some, they underestimate the inflation threat in the last fourth decades of 2021. So that's why they have experienced such a high inflation rate, such as a 7.9 percentage point. But still, that inflation will be declining moderately, and that is what the academicians and other experts expect. Well, for the Korean economy, even though the unemployment rate has been reported to be 4% or hovering 4% or something, but still, I'm not sure whether the Korean people who has experienced some high level of the wage and then now they are returning to the job, but they realize that now they know that how terrible the past job experience was because of they have suffered so much from the lower real wage and the actually declining real wage for the past several decades. So that is the issue to overcome. And to that regard, as long as we have room for fiscal policy, and we must have maintained, anytime we make use of the fiscal policy, rather than increasing the interest rate too fast or too much, because rising interest rate, clearly it helps remove the inflation threat pressure, but however, it could damage the demand. It could reduce the demand, so as a result, then the economy is in declining. So that is so we need some balanced attitude and a balanced perspective on the upcoming inflation threat.
Right, and we have more room for fiscal policies
Yes,
then.
right.
Professor Kim, another task facing the incoming administration is that related to the real estate market and related taxation. What has been shared thus far?
In his presidential election campaign, the president-elect pointed out several times that one of the most disturbing factors in the real estate market is fast increasing property tax in the last 5 years. So new government's real estate market policy is on lessening the property tax burden. The bottom line is, I think, freezing at current property tax at 2020 level. At the same time, new government will try to provide more apartments in major metro areas in Seoul, Incheon, Daejeon, Gwangju, and Daegu. So it means that government will try to stabilize the real estate market through providing more apartment, not by trying to control the demand size of the apartment.
Right. And staying with the same topic, Professor, what perhaps then are some of the potential risks of slashing property taxes to levels seen in the year 2020 and perhaps relaxing relevant regulations?
It is up to the diagnosis about the current economic situation in Korea. As I mentioned earlier, if the Korean economy needs to grow and we have not reached yet the full employment rate, then we can say that some transitory or temporary tax cut and the tax exemption credit could be of help to the people who have suffered from the coronavirus pandemic and this kind of shortage of the supply in the past several months. And so to that regard, a temporary tax cut would be help, but that should not be extended for further at all, and it should not be limited to the benefit of some rich people. So that is my concern, and so to that regard, as long as the newly elected president-elect Mr. Yoon has decided to supply the real estate further, so that could help remove some housing price expectation that has been prevalent among the people during the Moon government, President Moon's government. So that could be relieved and removed. So that would help to stabilize the housing price. But I don't think the housing price bubble will burst, and then we have. I don't think we are going to experience the downward spiral of housing price.
Right. And Professor Kim, also during his campaign rallies, President-elect Yoon pledged to support economic growth led by the private sector rather than one that is led by the state. What changes can we expect?
Promoting economic activities through deregulation is the main theme of the new government. So in the long run, it is a great news to both of the employers and employees, because employers will find more business opportunities, and at the same time, the employees, workers, will find more job opportunities. Mr. Yoon particularly emphasized deregulation in the fields of IT and of course, industrial revolution related industries like 3D printers and big data and so on. So there will be big expansion of businesses in IT-related industries. But get back to the real economy, there are actually huge conflicts between companies, workers, and governments. So in this respect, I think strong leadership is needed to compromise different economic interests among these economic players.
Right. And moving forward, Professor Song, what changes are likely within the labor market under the new administration? Mr. Yoon has spoken about the need for flexibility with regard to working hours.
Right. I believe that in Korean labor market, people has experienced a surge of the minimum wage for the past 5 years. And then it is very difficult to go back to when the minimum wage is very low. The reason is because in the U.S. experience, then during the outbreak of the coronavirus, and the U.S. has suffered from the shortage of the labor supply. And then the people realized that they do not want to go back what they used to earn. So that is described as a great resignation era under the coronavirus pandemic. So the same would be the case to Korean labor market also. So the issue is whether the Korean economy has reached the full employment rate, and the economic growth rate is very strong right now. So that is a question about that. So if that is we are not convinced yet the Korean economy is on the path to the full recovery and to the past track, then we should be very careful in increase of the interest rate and adjustment of minimum wage rate, because that could cause some kind of resignation, and the people do not want to go back what they used to work. So it means that the shortage of the labor supply could be a burden to the recovery of the Korean economy.
Right, I see. And Professor Kim, aside from what we've covered thus far, is there another perhaps challenge on the economic front that you believe needs to be well addressed by the incoming administration?
Well, I think everyone has different hopes and expectations on the new government. Basically, however, I think the economy after COVID pandemic will be totally different from that of before the pandemic. So new economy provides both of challenges and opportunities together. But if new government does not manage these new and huge changes appropriately, it can hurt really the economic growth potential of the Korean economy. So even though it takes long and it is painful, the new government should be bolster the economic growth potential through improving birth rate problem and unfair income distribution problem, and improving workers' productivity.
Right. And Professor Song, what would you care to highlight as being in need of better attention by the new administration?
The new government, and particularly the new chairman of the Bank of Korea, should be very cautious in determination of the interest rate, because it could cause some damage on the demand. And so because we know that the current problem is due to some supply disruption, then we have to deal with supply issue, not the demand issue. So increasing interest rate, that is a very indirectly and very good way to control the inflation, but not indirectly, because it could have least side effect. But however, we must be careful about not to remove the punch bowl too early to reduce the, and end up with reducing the demand and consumption, and then create an obstacle for the recovery of the economy. That's my opinion.
Right, you would support then cautious efforts.
Right.
All right, Professor Song, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. Professor Kim, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much.